destroy her completely. Make sure every finger points at the fat secretary. Victor Callahan said it without blinking, without hesitating, without a single trace of guilt crossing his face. He was standing inside Anthony Moretti's private office at midnight, both hands moving deliberately through Clara's desk, pulling files, snapping photographs, pocketing documents she had spent weeks organizing. He took her personal notebook and dropped it directly into an evidence bag he had brought himself. Then he straightened up, smoothed his jacket, and smiled at the two men standing behind him. By morning, he said quietly, she won't just be fired. She'll be in a cell. If this story hits you somewhere deep, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment right now telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The city of Chicago does not sleep at 3 in the morning. It just gets quieter, slower, darker, the kind of dark where secrets feel safer and the truth feels far away. Anthony Moretti was not a man who slept well on ordinary nights. Sleep required a kind of peace that a man in his position could not afford. There were always accounts to balance, alliances to maintain, and enemies to monitor. His mind never fully stopped. Even in the rare hours when he lay still, some part of him was always listening for footsteps in the hallway, for a car engine that idled too long on the street below, for a sound that did not belong. Tonight he was sitting in the leather chair by the window of his penthouse, 52 floors above the city, dressed in a white shirt with the collar open, and a glass of whiskey resting untouched on the side table. He was reading through a financial report that his accountant had flagged earlier in the week, something about a discrepancy in one of the warehouse accounts. Nothing dramatic, just a number that didn't add up the way it should have. He had circled it in red pen and written a single word next to it. The word was why. He had not found the answer yet. Then the phone rang, not his personal phone, not the one his daughter called him on, not the one his lawyers used, not the one connected to his legitimate real estate business. The other phone, the black one, the one that sat in a locked drawer of his nightstand and had a number known to fewer than 6 people on this earth. Anthony did not move for 2 full seconds after it rang. In 15 years of operating behind closed doors in the most powerful criminal organization in the Midwest, that phone had rung exactly 4 times. The first time was when his father died. The second time was when a federal agent had gotten too close. The third time was when one of his most trusted men had been shot in a parking garage in Milwaukee. The fourth time was the night someone tried to burn down his first legitimate business. Every single time that phone rang, something changed. Something broke. Something that could not be put back together the same way. He opened the drawer, he looked at the phone. It rang again. He picked it up. Moretti. The voice on the other end was not a voice he recognized. It was calm, professional, official, in a way that immediately made his chest tighten. Mr. Moretti, my name is Officer Daniel Reyes. I'm calling from Cook County Detention Center. I'm sorry to call at this hour, sir, but we have a situation here, and the individual being held specifically requested this number. Anthony said nothing. He waited. Sir, we have a woman in custody tonight. She was arrested approximately 2 hours ago near your company's distribution warehouse on the south side. She's been processed and booked. She's being held on suspicion of financial fraud and unauthorized access to restricted property. A pause. Her name is Clara Bennett. She says she works for you. Anthony stood up slowly from the chair. He did not yell. He did not curse. He simply stood up. The way a man stands when the ground beneath him is shifted, and he needs to find his balance before he takes another step. Clara Bennett, he repeated. Yes, sir. She was allowed 1 phone call. Another pause, shorter this time. She asked for you, Mr. Moretti. Not a lawyer, not a family member. You. He was already moving toward the closet. Tell her I'm coming, he said. Don't say anything else to her until I get there. He ended the call. For a long moment, he stood in front of his closet without opening it. He was not thinking about what suit to wear or how long the drive would take. He was thinking about Clara Bennett, the woman who had been sitting at the desk outside his office for the past 9 years. The woman who brought him coffee without being asked, who remembered every appointment and every deadline without writing a single thing down in the wrong place, who had once stayed until midnight on a Tuesday to reorganize an entire filing system because she thought it would save him 12 minutes every morning. Clara Bennett, who apologized when someone bumped into her, who kept a small ceramic plant on her desk because she read somewhere that plants improved air quality and she wanted the office to be comfortable for everyone who walked through, who cried silently, turning her face away the one time a junior associate had raised his voice at her in the hallway over a scheduling mistake that had not even been her fault. That woman was sitting in a county jail right now, and she had called him. Anthony put on his jacket. He did not call his driver. He did not call his lawyer. He did not call Victor. He walked to his own private elevator, descended to the private garage, and got behind the wheel of his own car, something he had not done months, and drove out into the storm that had been building over Chicago all night. The rain came down hard and sideways, and the streets were nearly empty, and he drove faster than he should have, and he kept thinking about the same thing. Not the arrest, not the evidence, not the warehouse. Those things could be explained and handled and fixed. He kept thinking about her voice, the way the officer had described it. She asked for you, not a lawyer, not family, you. Clara had always been precise about everything. She did not make random decisions. She did not call people without a reason. If she had asked for him specifically with her one phone call, with whatever composure she had left after 2 hours in a holding room, then she had a reason, a real one. He just didn't know what it was yet. The Cook County Detention Center sat on the south side of the city like a building that had given up trying to look like anything other than what it was. Harsh fluorescent lights, cinder block walls, the particular smell of industrial cleaner and something beneath it that no amount of cleaner could ever fully remove. Anthony had been inside places like this before, but always on the other side of the conversation, always as the man who walked in to collect someone, to post bail, to make a problem disappear with the right words and the right lawyer standing beside him. Tonight he was alone. He walked up to the front desk and the officer at the window, young, with the slightly startled look of someone who had not expected a man in a $12,000 suit to walk through those doors at 3:15 in the morning, sat up straighter. "I'm Anthony Moretti," he said simply. "I'm here for Clara Bennett." The officer typed something, looked at the screen. "Typed again, sir. She's still being processed." The detective handling her case, Detective Walsh, he asked if you'd be willing to speak with him first. "Fine," Anthony said. "Where is he?" He was led down a hallway that smelled like burnt coffee and old paperwork and into a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and a mirror that everyone in the room understood was not actually a mirror. Detective Walsh was already standing when Anthony entered mid-50s. Gray at the temples, the kind of tired that comes from decades of working nights and seeing the worst of people on a regular basis. He had a manila folder on the table in front of him. "Mr. Moretti," he gestured to the empty chair. "Thank you for coming in." "I didn't come for you," Anthony said. He sat down anyway. "I came for my employee. Tell me what you think she did." Walsh studied him for a moment. Then he opened the folder. "Clara Bennett, age 39, employed as executive secretary at Moretti Holdings for 9 years. He glanced up. "That's a long time for one job." "She's good at it," Anthony said evenly. "I'm sure she is." Walsh slid a photograph across the table. It showed a gray sedan parked on a service road adjacent to one of Anthony's warehouses on the south side of building, registered to a subsidiary company that handled distribution for his legitimate packaging business. The photograph was timestamped 11:47 p. "This vehicle is registered to Clara Bennett. We found her inside the property perimeter, on company property," Anthony said, "where she works. At midnight, alone, with no authorization on file for after-hours access." Walsh pulled out another sheet. "And when our officers entered the property, they found her in possession of several financial documents. Documents that, according to our forensic accounting team, who have been looking at these records since this morning, contain evidence of significant financial fraud, wire transfers, falsified invoices, money moving through a series of shell accounts connected to your organization." Anthony looked at the documents without touching them. He had seen falsified financial records before. He knew what they looked like when someone had constructed them carefully over time versus when someone had assembled them quickly to tell a particular story. These looked like the latter. But he couldn't say that to Walsh. "Where is she?" he said instead. "She's in a holding room." Walsh leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Moretti, I've been doing this for 26 years. I've interviewed a lot of people in that room. And I'll tell you something, that woman in there does not look like someone who got caught. She looks like someone who walked into something she didn't understand and got hit by a truck." He paused. "She also hasn't said a single word since she asked for her phone call. Not one word. Just sits there with her hands folded on the table." Something moved in Anthony's chest that he could not immediately name. "I want to see her," he said. Walsh studied him again. Then he nodded and stood up. The holding room was smaller than the interview room. 1 table. 2 chairs bolted to the floor. A light overhead that flickered every few minutes in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. Clara was sitting with her back straight and her hands folded in front of her on the table, exactly the way Walsh had described. She was wearing the same clothes she'd had on at the office that afternoon, a dark gray sweater that was slightly too large for her, dark slacks, flat shoes. Her hair was pulled back the way she always wore it, but pieces had come loose and she hadn't fixed them. Her eyes were fixed on a point on the wall directly across from her, and she did not look up when the door opened. Then she heard his footsteps. She looked up. For one unguarded moment, her face broke completely, not into tears, not into relief, but into something rawer than either of those things. Like a person who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told they can put it down. Then she pulled herself together, visibly, deliberately, the way Clara Bennett pulled herself together, spine straightening, jaw setting, eyes going steady. "Mr. Moretti," she said. Her voice was even. It barely wavered at all. "I'm sorry, I know this is a terrible time." Anthony sat down across from her. He looked at her for a long moment. The slight redness around her eyes that she was working very hard to hide. The tension in her shoulders, the way she kept her hands folded because she didn't want him to see that they weren't entirely steady. "Clara," he said quietly, "what happened?" She opened her mouth, closed it, looked down at her hands. "I found something," she said, 3 weeks ago, in the quarterly reports. There was a discrepancy similar to the one you circled in red last week, but larger, much larger. And when I started tracing it back through the subsidiary accounts I found, she stopped. She looked up at him. "I found a pattern, Mr. Moretti. Someone inside the company has been moving money. Not small amounts. We're talking about transfers in the range of $4 to $7 million spread across 18 months, routed through accounts that look legitimate on the surface, but don't actually connect to any real business activity." Anthony was very still. "I tried to find out who," she continued. "I couldn't do it from my workstation. The access logs would have been visible to whoever set up the system, and I didn't know who that was. So I went to the warehouse last night, because there's an offline server there that archives financial records independently of the main network. I thought if I could access it directly, I'd pull the original transaction data before it was scrubbed." "Clara," he said. Her name came out differently than he intended, quieter, heavier. "Why didn't you come to me?" She looked at him steadily. "Because I didn't know who I could trust," she said simply. The room was very quiet for a moment. "The pattern I found," she said carefully, "it didn't just involve the subsidiary accounts. It involved authorization codes. Authorization codes that only 3 people in the organization have access to." She held his gaze. "You are one of those 3 people, Mr. Moretti." She let that sit. "I didn't think it was you," she said, and her voice did not change when she said it, no softening, no performance, just the flat certainty of a woman stating a fact. "But I didn't know how to bring you evidence of a betrayal inside your own organization without knowing for certain who was behind it. If I came to you with half the story, and if the wrong person found out I was asking questions, the evidence would disappear, and I would disappear with it." She paused. "So I tried to finish it first, by yourself," he said. "By myself," she agreed. She didn't apologize for it. Anthony looked at her across the table. He had spent his entire adult life learning to read people, to see past what they were saying and understand what they were actually doing, what they actually wanted, what they were actually afraid of. It was the skill that had kept him alive and solvent and in control for 30 years. He was good at it. He was better at it than almost anyone he had ever met. He had sat across from this woman for 9 years. He had never once in 9 years looked at her the way he was looking at her right now, because he had never had a reason to. She had always just been Clara, the person who kept the office running, the person who remembered things so he didn't have to, the person who was quietly, reliably, invisibly necessary, the piece of machinery you only notice when it stops working. He was noticing now. "What did you find on the server?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Enough," she said. Anthony went back to Walsh before he left the building. He did not negotiate or argue or make threats. He simply explained, in the particular tone he used when he was not making a request, that Clara Bennett would be released on personal recognizance within the hour, that she would have legal representation present for any further questioning, and that any attempt to pursue charges without first reviewing the information she had been attempting to retrieve would create a situation that neither the department nor the city prosecutor's office would enjoy navigating. Walsh listened. He did not look happy about any of it. But he looked like a man who had been doing this long enough to recognize when continuing to argue was going to cost more than it was worth. Clara was released at 4:22 a.m. She walked out into the parking lot with a manila envelope containing her personal effects, her phone, her keys, her employee badge, and she stood in the rain for a moment, not moving, just breathing. Like someone reminding herself that the air was different out here, that it moved. Anthony held an umbrella over her. She hadn't asked him to. He just did it. My car is in the impound, she said. I'll have it retrieved tomorrow, he said. Come on. She looked at the umbrella, then at him, then at the parking lot, as if she was calculating whether it was possible home in this rain and whether it would be less complicated than accepting a ride from her boss at 4 in the morning. Clara, he said. She walked with him to the car. They drove in silence for several minutes. The rain had eased slightly. The city was beginning that slow transition from 3A. Darkness toward 4 a.m. gray, not lighter exactly, just a different shade of dark. You said 2 of the other 3 people with those authorization codes, Anthony said without taking his eyes off the road. You told me there are 3 people who have access. One is me, he paused. Who are the other 2? Clara had her hands folded in her lap. She was looking out the window. Marcus Hale, she said. Your head of compliance. And Victor Callahan. Anthony's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Just slightly. Just enough that if anyone had been watching closely, they would have noticed. But his voice stayed completely level. And from the pattern you found, he said carefully, which one of them does the evidence point to? Clara turned her head. She looked at him. She didn't answer immediately. And in the silence before she answered, Anthony felt something he had not felt in a long time, something that sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and cold, the particular weight of a truth you already know before it's spoken. Victor, she said, one word. The city moved past them through the rain-streaked windows, and the stone in Anthony Moretti's chest settled deeper, and he kept driving, and he did not say anything for a very long time. Because Victor Callahan had been sitting at his right hand for 15 years. Victor Callahan had been the best man at his brother's wedding. Victor Callahan had stood at the hospital with him the night Anthony's father had his first stroke, had sat beside him in the waiting room for 6 hours without speaking, had simply been there the way you are only there for someone you actually love. Victor Callahan had looked him in the eye 2 weeks ago at dinner over a bottle of wine that cost $800 and told him that loyalty was the only currency that actually mattered. Anthony kept his eyes on the road. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning, don't leave anything out. Clara unfolded her hands. She took a slow breath, and then she began to talk. She talked for 45 minutes. She talked while Anthony drove without any particular destination, circling through the empty streets of Chicago in the rain, because neither of them was ready to stop yet. She talked about the first discrepancy she had noticed, a small one, almost invisible, the kind of thing that would only be caught by someone who had been staring at the same numbers for years, and therefore immediately noticed when one of them was slightly wrong. She talked about how she had started pulling historical records quietly, a few at a time, never so many that it would trigger an audit flag. She talked about the shell accounts, 4 of them, all registered to holding companies with names that sounded legitimate, all traced back through a network of subsidiary entities to a single point of origin. Victor Callahan's personal management company. She talked about the authorization codes, how the transactions had been split deliberately to stay below certain reporting thresholds, how they had been timed to coincide with periods when Anthony was traveling, and therefore less likely to be reviewing real-time financial activity, how the documentation had been constructed with just enough official language to pass a cursory review but would not survive close scrutiny. She talked about the documents she had found, the ones the police had taken from her. She described what was on each of them and where she had found them and how she had verified that the records were authentic and not reconstructed. And then she told him the part she had been holding back. There's something else, she said. Anthony glanced at her. The transfers weren't just theft, she said. Her voice was very careful now, precise. The way her voice got when she was presenting information that she had checked 3 times because she needed to be absolutely sure before she said it out loud. Victor wasn't just taking money from the company, he was moving it in a way that would leave a record. A specific kind of record. She paused. The kind of record that, if someone were to present it to a federal investigator, would look like you had been conducting the transactions yourself. The car slowed almost imperceptibly. He wasn't just stealing from you, she said. He was building a case against you. He was constructing a paper trail designed to look like you were the source of the fraudulent activity. He was setting you up. She turned to look at him directly. And I think he was planning to hand it over to someone, to whom, Anthony said. It was not quite a question. I don't know yet, she said honestly. That's what I was trying to find when they arrested me. The car stopped at a red light. The rain tapped against the windshield. How long, Anthony asked. How long has he been planning this? Yes. Clara looked out at the red light. Based on the earliest transaction I found, she said, I think he started building the framework approximately 2 years ago. The active transfers began 18 months ago. She paused. He's been patient, Mr. Moretti. Whoever he's doing this for, whatever he wants from this, he planned it for a long time. The light turned green. Anthony drove. His face had not changed. His voice had not changed. His hands on the wheel were steady. But somewhere behind his eyes, something had gone very quiet in the particular way that things go quiet just before they become very loud. Clara, he said. Yes? The documents the police took from you tonight. He was quiet for a moment. Were those the originals, or did you make copies? There was a brief pause. And then, for the first time since he had walked into that holding room, Clara Bennett allowed herself the smallest possible version of a smile. Mr. Moretti, she said, I have been managing your paperwork for 9 years. She reached into the inner pocket of her oversized sweater and placed a USB drive on the center console. I always make copies, she said. Anthony pulled the car over. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel and looked at that small silver drive sitting on the center console, no larger than his thumb, containing what was either the end of Victor Callahan or the most elaborate trap he had ever walked into. He looked at Clara. She was watching him with that steady, even gaze. She always had, the one that gave nothing away and revealed nothing that she hadn't decided to reveal. He had always attributed that quality to professionalism, to the particular composure of a woman who dealt with high-pressure situations every day and had learned to keep her reactions internal. He was only now understanding that it was something else entirely. It was not composure that came from training. It was composure that came from spending a lifetime being overlooked and learning that the only person you could ever fully rely on was yourself. Why didn't you just walk away, he said. It was a genuine question. When you found it, when you realized what you were looking at, you could have left it alone. You had nothing to do with any of it. Nobody would have blamed you. Clara was quiet for a moment. Because it wasn't right, she said, as if that was obvious. As if that was the only possible answer. Someone was using your name to do something wrong. Someone who was supposed to be your ally. And because of what they were building, you were going to take the fall for something you didn't do. She looked at him. That wasn't right. I wasn't going to let that happen. Even if it meant getting arrested, he said. I didn't expect to get arrested, she said dryly. And yet here we are, she agreed. He looked at her for another long moment. He had spent 30 years building walls, necessary walls. The kind of walls a man builds when too many people want something from him and too few of them want it for the right reasons. He had learned to trust slowly and verify everything and assume that affection and loyalty were, at their core, always conditional on something. He was sitting in a car at 4:30 in the morning with a woman who had gone into a warehouse alone at midnight to protect him, not because he had asked her to, not because she expected anything in return, because she thought it was right. He picked up the USB drive. He held it in his palm for a moment. Then he carefully placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket. We're going somewhere safe, he said. I need you to tell me everything again from the beginning, and this time I'm going to record it. Can you do that? Yes, she said immediately. And Clara, he started the car again. Whatever happens next, whatever I have to do about this, you are not going back to that jail. That's already done. She nodded. She didn't thank him. She didn't tell him it was a relief, or that she'd been afraid, or any of the things a person might say in that moment. She just nodded, the same way she nodded when he confirmed a meeting time or approved a budget line, because this too was just a thing that needed to be handled, and they were going to handle it. He pulled back onto the road. The rain was letting up. Somewhere far to the east, the sky was beginning to change, not quite light, not quite dark, that particular hour that belongs to neither the night that is ending nor the day that hasn't started yet. Anthony Moretti drove through it, and in his jacket pocket, against his chest, a USB drive the size of his thumb was carrying the weight of 15 years of trust, and the shape of a betrayal so careful, so patient, so deliberate that it could only have been built by someone who knew him very well. Someone who had sat across from him at dinner 2 weeks ago and talked about loyalty. Anthony drove, and he thought about the word Victor had used, loyalty. And he thought about the woman sitting in the passenger seat beside him who had walked into a warehouse alone in the dark with no protection and no guarantee of anything and had done it anyway. He thought about what loyalty actually looked like, not what it sounded like at an $800 dinner, what it actually looked like at 3 in the morning in a county jail when you have one phone call, and you use it to call the person you were trying to protect. The safe house was a townhouse on the north side that Anthony kept registered under a shell company, nobody connected to him publicly. He had used it exactly twice before, once to hide a witness, once to hide himself. It was clean, quiet, and completely off the grid of anyone who thought they knew where Anthony Moretti went when things went wrong. He brought Clara there at 5 in the morning. She walked in without asking where they were or why he had chosen this particular place. She didn't comment on the sparse furniture or the reinforced front door or the fact that there were no photographs anywhere on the walls. She simply sat down at the kitchen table, folded her hands in front of her the same way she had folded them in the jail cell, and waited for him to tell her what came next. Anthony set a recorder on the table between them. He set a legal pad beside it and a pen beside that. Then, he sat down across from her and looked at her for a moment. "Start from the very beginning," he said. "Not from when you found the first discrepancy. Before that. Tell me when you first had a feeling something was wrong. Not a fact. A feeling." Clara looked at the recorder. Then at him, 7 months ago, she said, "Victor asked me to reroute a meeting invitation. He said you had approved a schedule change for a quarterly review, a meeting with the compliance team. He asked me to remove 3 names from the attendee list and not to put the change in the official calendar." Anthony was very still. "He said you wanted the meeting kept informal," she continued, "and I almost did it. Because Victor Callahan had been in that office almost as long as I had, and when he told me you had approved something, I had no reason to doubt him." She paused. "Except you had never, not once in 9 years, asked me to keep something off the official calendar. You were specific about documentation. You always said if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. So you didn't do it," Anthony said. "I logged the change and I notated that the request came from Mr. Callahan on your behalf," she said. "Standard procedure. And then I watched to see if you would contradict it. You never told me, you never asked." She said it without accusation. "And the meeting went forward and nothing seemed wrong. And I told myself I was being paranoid. But I kept the notation in the file." She looked at him steadily. "I keep everything in the file, Mr. Moretti." Anthony leaned back in his chair. He thought about that meeting 7 months ago. He had attended it himself briefly before leaving early because of a call from his attorney. He hadn't thought twice about the attendee list. He hadn't noticed who wasn't there. Victor had been the one who summarized the meeting outcomes to him the following morning. Victor had been the one who told him everything was fine. "Keep going," Anthony said. She kept going. She talked about the second moment 4 months later when she had been cross-referencing vendor invoices for a routine quarterly audit and found that a supplier she had never heard of had been paid on 3 separate occasions for services that did not correspond to any project in the active record. She had searched for the vendor name in every database she had access to. She had found nothing. A company name with no address, no registration record she could locate, no digital footprint of any kind. She had written it down. She had put it in a folder, marked with a date and a question mark, and filed it in the bottom drawer of her desk, behind the hanging files for inactive accounts, where nobody would look unless they already knew what they were looking for. "How many things did you put in that folder?" Anthony asked. 11 separate incidents over 7 months, she said. "Before I started connecting them into a pattern." 11, he looked at her across the table. In 7 months, this woman had noticed 11 separate anomalies, each one small enough to dismiss on its own, each one easily explained away, each one the kind of thing that would slide past every other person in his organization without leaving a trace, and she had quietly, methodically, without saying a word to anyone, filed every single one of them away. Not because she had suspected Victor specifically, not because she had been looking for a conspiracy, but because something felt wrong, and she was the kind of person who did not let things that felt wrong disappear into the noise. "Show me the pattern," he said. She reached into the pocket of her sweater and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully and placed it on the table between them. It was handwritten, neat columns, precise dates, amounts, account references, initials. It looked like something she had prepared for a board presentation, clean, organized, completely legible, except it had been written on a piece of paper she had been carrying in her pocket, and it contained information that could dismantle the financial architecture of someone's 15-year plan. Anthony looked at it for a long time without speaking. The numbers told a story. Clara had connected the dots between vendor payments and wire transfers and authorization codes and timing patterns in a way that was not obvious unless you were looking at all of them simultaneously, which nobody had been except her. Individually, each transaction had a plausible explanation. Together, they described something deliberate, something patient, Something that had been constructed by a person who understood exactly how Anthony's financial systems worked and had specifically designed the deception to move beneath the threshold of detection. Someone who had been inside long enough to know all the blind spots. Someone like Victor. He used your authorization codes, Anthony said quietly. Some of them were yours, she said. But the timestamps don't match your actual access patterns. I pulled your login records, the legitimate ones, from the main server and compared them against the timestamps on the fraudulent authorizations. There's no overlap. She pointed to a column on the right side of the page. Whoever used your codes accessed them from a secondary terminal. One that was supposed to be decommissioned 2 years ago, but was never actually taken offline. Anthony looked at the column. How did you know about the secondary terminal? Because I processed the decommissioned paperwork 2 years ago, she said simply. And the IT confirmation that came back was missing a signature. I flagged it at the time. Nobody followed up. I put it in the file. He stared at her. You put it in the file, he repeated. I put it in the file, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Clara, he said carefully, is there anything you have noticed in 9 years that you did not put in a file? She considered this genuinely. There was one time in 2019 when someone left a coffee cup on the conference table after a meeting, and I never found out whose it was, she said. That has always bothered me. Anthony looked at her. She was not joking. Not exactly. But there was something at the edge of it, a dryness, a very small flash of something that might almost have been humor, and it was so unexpected. In this kitchen, at 5 in the morning, after everything that had happened in the last 3 hours, that he felt something loosen slightly in his chest. He almost smiled. He didn't. But almost all right, he said. He reached across the table and pressed record on the recorder. Tell me everything again. In order. I'm going to record all of it. She nodded once. She straightened the piece of paper in front of her. She folded her hands, and she began again. It was 5:17 in the morning. Outside, the rain had completely stopped. Chicago was breathing again. Inside, Anthony Moretti was learning exactly how much he had missed, and it was considerable. By 6 a.m., he had filled the entire legal pad. By 6:30, he had called exactly 2 people. Not Victor, not his legal team. He called his most trusted accountant, a woman named Rosa DiMartino, who had been with the organization for 20 years and who Anthony knew with the certainty he reserved for very few things had no connection to Victor's inner circle. And he called a man named Patrick Shea, a former federal investigator who had worked for Anthony in a private capacity for the past 8 years, and who knew how to verify financial records without leaving a trail. He told them both to come immediately. He told them to use the rear entrance and to tell no one. While they waited, Clara sat at the table and drank the coffee Anthony made. It was not good coffee. He was not a man who spent much time in his own kitchen, and she did not complain about it. Anthony sat across from her with his own cup and looked at the legal pad. There's something I need to ask you, he said. She looked up. The night you went to the warehouse, he said. The car that was registered to you, was that actually your car? She set down her cup. No, she said. He waited. My car is a 2019 Honda Accord, gray. The vehicle the police found near the warehouse was a 2021 Chevrolet Malibu, also gray. She paused. Similar enough in the dark, especially in the rain, that someone who wasn't looking carefully might accept the association. But the registration, she stopped. The registration was in your name, he said. Yes, her voice was very level. Which means someone either forged registration documents or they had access to my personal information through a legitimate channel, employment records, background check files, something official. She looked at him. Someone inside the organization set that car up. They put it there. They made sure it would be found. And they made sure it would be found the same night I was there. The room was quiet. They knew you were going, Anthony said. They knew I was going, she confirmed. Which meant someone had been watching her. Not casually, deliberately. Someone had tracked her movements closely enough to know she had identified the warehouse as a target, had anticipated her timeline, and had positioned a vehicle registered in her name at the scene before she arrived. Anthony thought about what that required. It required resources. It required someone with access to her employment file, someone with the connections to forge or transfer a vehicle registration, someone with enough surveillance capability to monitor a civilian employee without her knowledge. Someone with a great deal of power. Someone who had been expecting her to find the warehouse eventually. He knew you were getting close, Anthony said. Clara said quietly. Whatever tripwire I triggered, whatever search or access request tipped him off, he had that contingency ready. The car, the documents the police found on me, those weren't assembled quickly. That took preparation. She looked at her hands. He just needed a reason to use it, and I gave him one. There was something in her voice when she said that last sentence, not guilt exactly, but the weight of someone who had calculated a risk and accepted the outcome and was not processing the fact that the outcome had been a jail cell at 3 in the morning. You didn't give him anything, Anthony said. He was looking for any excuse. If it hadn't been the warehouse, he would have manufactured something else. She looked up at him. He held her gaze. You were not wrong to try, he said. You were working with incomplete information in a situation where asking for help might have made everything worse. You made the best decision you could make. He paused. I'm not telling you that to make you feel better. I'm telling you that because it's true and because I want you to stop sitting there blaming yourself for the part that went wrong. Clara was quiet for a moment. I got arrested, she said. You got arrested and you came out of it with a USB drive full of evidence that is going to end Victor Callahan, he said. I'd call that a qualified success. She looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, subtle, slight. The kind of shift that only happens in a person's face when they hear something they had given up expecting to hear. Not gratitude, not relief. Something quieter than either of those things. Something that looked like the particular surprise of being seen clearly by someone who had the power to look away and chose not to. She picked up her coffee cup. It's really bad coffee, she said. I know, he said. You should hire someone to make the coffee. I'll put it on the list, he said. She almost smiled. He almost smiled back. Rosa DiMartino arrived at 6:48. She was 61 years old and 5'2", and she walked into the kitchen without being surprised by anything she saw, which was one of the qualities Anthony had always valued most in her. She set her bag on the table, looked at Clara, looked at Anthony, looked at the legal pad, and said, talk. Anthony talked. Rosa listened without interrupting for 11 minutes. Then she asked for the USB drive. Anthony gave it to her. She plugged it into her laptop and started reading. 3 minutes later, she looked up. This is real, she said. I know it's real, Anthony said. No, she turned the laptop toward him. I can verify these transaction records against our internal systems right now, sitting here, and they match. This isn't fabricated. Whoever compiled this pulled directly from the source files. She looked at Clara. You did this yourself? Yes, Clara said. Rosa looked at her for a moment. Then she looked back at Anthony. You've had her answering phones, Rosa said flatly. She does more than answer phones, Anthony said. Clearly, Rosa said. She turned back to the laptop. Give me 2 hours. Patrick Shea arrived 20 minutes after Rosa. He was 54, former FBI Financial Crimes Unit, and he came in through the rear entrance carrying a hard-sided briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who had learned long ago not to ask too many questions before he understood what he was looking at. Anthony gave him the condensed version, 10 minutes. Facts only. Patrick looked at the handwritten page. He looked at the laptop screen Rosa was working on. He asked Clara 4 questions, the kind of questions that were designed to find the gaps in a story. Clara answered all 4 without hesitation and without contradiction. Patrick looked at Anthony. How long has this been building, he said. 18 months of active transfers, Anthony said. The framework probably started 2 years ago. Patrick set down his briefcase. He wasn't doing this alone. The room went still. Anthony looked at him. The architecture on this, Patrick pointed at the laptop screen, the way these accounts are layered, the way the authorization traces have been obscured. This is not one person working in a spreadsheet at night. This is professional work. Someone with specific expertise built the shell structure. Someone who does this for a living. He looked at Anthony. Victor is your internal source. But there's an external architect. Someone he brought in. For what purpose, Anthony said. Patrick looked at him steadily. Victor isn't just stealing from you and framing you, he said. The end point of this paper trail, if it were presented to federal investigators with the right framing, wouldn't just expose you to fraud charges. He paused. It would give someone enough leverage to take over your entire operation. Every legitimate business, every subsidiary, every asset. If you were indicted, if you were facing asset forfeiture, someone would be positioned to move in and acquire everything for pennies while you were dealing with federal prosecutors. Silence, complete, absolute silence. He's selling me out, Anthony said. His voice was quiet. Not to the government, to a competitor. That would be my red, Patrick said. Who, Anthony said. Patrick shook his head. That I don't know yet. But the external architect, whoever built the shell structure, they'll have a signature. Financial forensics will find it. It'll take time. How much time? Days. Maybe less if Rosa finds what I think she's going to find in those transaction records. Rosa did not look up from the laptop. Give me 90 minutes, she said. Anthony stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room and both hands at his sides, and he breathed one breath, two, three, the way a man breathes when he is choosing very carefully between the thing he wants to do and the thing he needs to do. Victor, 15 years. Every significant decision in that time had involved Victor sitting across a table from him, offering an opinion, framing a perspective, steering a conversation. Every major expansion, every crisis that had required delicate handling. Victor had been there for all of it, inside all of it, trusted completely and without reservation. Anthony thought about how many times he had dismissed a concern because Victor said it was fine. He thought about the financial report from last week, the discrepancy he had circled in red, the word he had written beside it. Why? Victor had been sitting in the office when Anthony had mentioned that report. He had glanced at it, shrugged, and said the accounting team had probably already flagged it, and it would be resolved by Friday. Anthony had believed him. He turned back to the room. Clara, he said. She looked up. Does Victor know what's on that drive? She thought about it carefully. He knows I found the warehouse records. He may not know the full extent of what I compiled before that. She paused. But he knows enough to understand that if I gave you anything substantive, his timeline is compromised, which means he's going to move, Anthony said. Probably, she said. How quickly? If he thinks I've been talking to you. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was 7:22 a.m. He knows you came to get me from the jail. He'll know about that within the hour if he doesn't already. He'll know that you didn't send a lawyer, that you went yourself. She met his eyes. He'll know that means something. And he'll know that if I had information to give you, I already gave it. She paused. He has maybe 6 to 8 hours before the window closes on whatever his contingency plan is. 6 to 8 hours, Anthony said. At the outside, she said. Anthony looked at Patrick. Patrick was already opening his briefcase. Then we work fast, Patrick said. They worked fast. Rosa found the first confirmation at 7:51, a transaction record that directly linked the shell account activity to Victor's personal management company, routed through a financial institution in Luxembourg. It was not a smoking gun by itself, but it was a thread. And Rosa DiMartino had spent 20 years pulling threads. Clara sat beside her and answered questions as they came, filling gaps, providing context, explaining the organizational logic behind decisions that looked opaque from the outside, but made complete sense once you understood how Anthony's systems were structured. She and Rosa worked in a rhythm that developed naturally, without anyone designing it, the way two people with compatible minds sometimes fall into step with each other without trying. At one point, Rosa said, without looking up from the screen, "How did you catch the vendor invoice discrepancy?" "The payment cycle was off by 4 days, Clara said. "We always pay vendors on a 30-day net. These were paid at 26 days. 4 days early is not much, but it was consistent across all 3 payments. A real vendor would have questioned why they were being paid early. A fake vendor wouldn't care." Rosa stopped typing. She looked at Clara. 4 days, she said. 4 days, Clara said. Rosa looked at Anthony across the room. "You've had her answering phones," she said again. Rosa, Anthony said. "I'm just making an observation," Rosa said, and turned back to the screen. At 8:34, Patrick found the external architect. He found the signature in the layering pattern of the shell companies, a specific structural sequence that he had seen before. Once, in a case he had worked during his last year at the FBI. A financial construction specialist who operated in Europe primarily, who had built similar frameworks for 3 other clients over the past decade. A man named Emil Voss, German national, currently operating out of Vienna, who specialized in building financial destructions packages, essentially customized paper trails designed to frame a specific target for crimes they had not committed. Emil Voss, who had been hired, according to Patrick's preliminary trace, approximately 22 months ago, by a holding company registered in Delaware that, after 4 layers of corporate ownership, connected back to a name Anthony recognized immediately, a name that hit him like a fist. "Dominic Ferrara," Patrick said quietly. Anthony sat down. Dominic Ferrara, the head of the Ferrara organization out of New York. A man Anthony had maintained a careful, formal, mutually beneficial distance from for 12 years. Not an ally, not an enemy. A neighbor in the territorial sense of the word, a man who operated in adjacent space and had, as far as Anthony had ever been able to determine, respected the boundaries between them. A man who had apparently been planning to erase him for 22 months. Victor approached Ferrara, Anthony said. It was not a question. Or Ferrara approached Victor, Patrick said. "We don't know which direction it went first." "It doesn't matter," Anthony said. "No," Patrick agreed. "It doesn't. The room was very quiet. Clara was watching Anthony, not with fear, not with the particular watchful caution of someone waiting to see how a dangerous man reacts to dangerous news. She was watching him the way she had always watched him, with attention, with the particular focus of someone who understood that her job, in this moment, was to be present and useful and ready for whatever came next. "What do we do?" she asked. He looked at her. He noticed, not for the first time this morning, that she had said "we," not "what do you do?" Not "what are you going to do, we?" "We finished building the case," he said. "Everything Patrick and Rosa have found, I want it documented, sourced, and verified. I want it airtight. For the right people." He looked at Patrick. "You still have contacts in the financial crimes division." "3 good ones," Patrick said. "I want a meeting. Today." This is bigger than Victor. Ferrara has been planning this for almost 2 years, and he's going to know by tonight that the frame didn't hold, which means he moves to a different plan. I want federal eyes on his operation before that happens. He looked at Rosa. "How long for a complete documentation package?" 4 hours, Rosa said. "You have 3, Anthony said. "Then stop talking to me," she said, and kept working. Anthony stood up again. He looked at Clara. She was pale with exhaustion. She had been awake for over 24 hours and had spent part of those hours in a jail cell, but her eyes were clear and her hands were steady, and she was sitting up straight, the same as she always sat, and when she met his gaze, she did not look away. "You should sleep," he said. "I should," she agreed. She didn't move. "Clara." "I'm not going to sleep," she said simply. "Not yet. Tell me what you need." He looked at her for a moment. He thought about the photograph that Victor had dropped in the trash. Her mother. He thought about the fact that Victor had been in her space, at her desk, going through her things, discarding the pieces of her life that he found inconvenient, and he had done it casually, without pause, the way you discard something that has no value. The rage that moved through Anthony in that moment was quiet and total, not hot, cold, the kind of cold that settles in and stays. "I need you to write down every interaction you had with Victor over the past 7 months," he said. "Every conversation, every request, everything he asked you to do, everything he told you Anthony had approved, everything that felt even slightly off. Write it by hand, all of it." "All right," she said. He slid the legal pad across the table to her. She picked up the pen. She started writing. And Anthony Moretti stood in the kitchen of a safe house at 8:41 in the morning, watching a woman who had been invisible to him for 9 years fill a legal pad with the evidence that was going to bring down a 15-year betrayal, and felt something shifting in him that he could not quite name. Not gratitude. Deeper than that, not respect. He had respected people before. This was different. It was closer to the particular feeling a person gets when they realize they have been standing next to something rare for a very long time and mistook it for ordinary, and cannot quite believe they waited this long to look. He pulled out his phone. He had one more call to make. And this one, unlike the calls he had made earlier, was going to change everything for Victor Callahan. He stepped out of the kitchen, stood in the hallway, and dialed. The phone rang twice. Victor answered on the second ring. His voice was warm, easy. Voice of a man who had been awake for hours managing a situation and was performing calm so naturally that you would never know unless you already knew. "Anthony," he said, "I heard about Clara. I'm so sorry. I never would have guessed. You want me to come in this morning? I can push my schedule." "No," Anthony said. "I just want to let you know I handled it." A pause. "Good," Victor said. "That's good. She was with us a long time. It's always harder when it's someone you trusted." "It is," Anthony said. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Victor," Anthony said. "Get some rest. I'll talk to you tomorrow." He ended the call. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he went back into the kitchen. Rosa was typing. Patrick was cross-referencing documents. Clara was writing, the pen moving steadily across the legal pad, her handwriting as neat and precise at 8:45 in the morning after a night in jail as it was on any ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Anthony sat back down. He picked up his own pen. He picked up a fresh sheet of paper, and he started writing too. Because Victor Callahan had spent 22 months building a case against Anthony Moretti. Anthony Moretti was going to spend the next 3 hours building one right back. And unlike Victor's case, which had been constructed on lies, on forged documents, on the deliberate corruption of trust, this one was going to be built on something that would hold up under every light, in every room, before every judge, the truth. And sitting across the table from him, filling page after page with the careful, precise, comprehensive memory of a woman who put everything in a file, was the person who had been holding that truth the whole time, while everyone else walked past her desk and never stopped to look. It was 9:12 in the morning when Rosa DiMartino pushed back from the laptop and said, "I found the second account." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Patrick Shea leaned over her shoulder, looked at the screen, and let out a slow breath through his nose. "That's not a shell company," he said. "No," Rosa said. "It's not." Anthony crossed the kitchen in 4 steps. He looked at the screen. The account was registered not to a holding company, not to a subsidiary, not to any of the layered corporate structures that Emil Voss had built for Victor. It was registered to a private individual, a real name. A real just in a suburb 40 minutes outside of Chicago. The name was Thomas Reeves. Anthony knew that name. Thomas Reeves was Victor Callahan's brother-in-law, married to Victor's younger sister for 16 years. A quiet man, an accountant by trade, who had attended exactly 3 company events in 15 years and had spent all 3 of them standing near the food table and speaking to no one. Anthony had shaken his hand at each one and forgotten him within the hour. "He ran the money through family," Anthony said. "Some of it," Rosa said. "Enough to keep his own name 1 full layer removed from the primary transactions. But Reeves was sloppy, or maybe he just trusted that nobody would ever connect him because he's invisible enough. There are transfer records here that are barely disguised. It's almost like he didn't try. Because he thought the frame would hold," Patrick said. "If Clara was arrested and charged, the investigation would stop at her. Nobody goes looking for a second layer when they already have a suspect in custody." Clara was still at the table. She had stopped writing. She was looking at the account name on the screen with an expression that was not quite surprise, more the particular look of a person watching the last piece of a puzzle drop into a slot they already knew was empty. "Thomas Reeves attended a company Christmas party 2 years ago," she said quietly. "Victor introduced us. He asked me very casually how the quarterly reporting system worked, whether financial records from subsidiaries were archived centrally or separately. I thought he was just making conversation." She paused. I silenced. "You had no reason not to," Anthony said. "I know," she said. But her jaw tightened slightly, and he could see she was filing that memory away differently now, recategorizing it the way she recategorized everything, with the precision of someone who did not let herself make the same mistake twice. "It's not your fault," he said. "I know that too," she said. And then very quietly, "It's still hard." He looked at her for a moment. She was not asking for comfort. She was simply being honest about the particular difficulty of realizing that a moment of ordinary human openness had been used against her by people who had been calculating and cold. He understood that feeling. He had spent decades trying to harden himself against it. He was not going to tell her to do the same. "Add Reeves to the documentation package," he said to Rosa. "Full account history." "Already started," Rosa said. It was 9:27. They had less than 6 hours before the window closed. Anthony went back to his chair and picked up his phone. He had 3 calls to make, and he needed to make them in the right order, because the order mattered. In situations like this, the order always mattered. Move too fast and you gave Victor time to pivot. Move too slow and Ferrara had time to distance himself from the operation. The timing had to be exact, close enough together that no one could warn anyone else, far enough apart that each action could land cleanly before the next one began. He thought it through for exactly 90 seconds. Then he dialed the first number. It rang once, twice, a third time. A man's voice answered, rough guarded, the voice of someone who had learned not to sound happy to hear from anyone until they knew who it was. "It's me," Anthony said. "I need you in position by 2 o'clock this afternoon. South Side. I'll send you the specific location at noon. Don't bring anyone I haven't personally approved." A pause. "How serious?" "Serious enough that I'm calling you myself at 9 in the morning, Anthony said. Understood. The line went dead. He dialed the second number. This one was answered on the first ring, Mr. Moretti. "Agent Carver," he let a beat pass. "I need 30 minutes of your time. In person this morning." Special Agent Dana Carver had been investigating the periphery of Anthony's organization for 6 years. She had never had enough to move on him directly, and Anthony had never given her enough to try. They existed in a particular professional tension, aware of each other, cautious of each other, maintaining a careful distance that both of them understood was as much practical as it was legal. She was smart, precise, and deeply motivated by the kind of justice that did not negotiate or bend. She was exactly the right person for what Anthony needed her to see. "That's an unusual request, Mr. Moretti," she said carefully. "I have documentation of a 22-month financial conspiracy that involves an external actor with federal jurisdiction implications," he said. "And I have a secretary who spent last night in a county jail for something she did not do. You can hear about it now, from me, with everything organized and sourced. Or you can hear about it in 3 days when it's already over and you missed it." He paused. "Your choice, Agent Carver." Silence on the line. "Where?" she said. He gave her an address, a legitimate law office downtown, belonging to an attorney he had used for years. Neutral ground. Somewhere with witnesses and legal protections on both sides. 11 o'clock, she said. 11 o'clock, he agreed. He ended the call, looked at Patrick across the table. She's coming, he said. Patrick nodded slowly. That's a significant move. Victor went to Ferrara, Anthony said. He went outside the organization. He brought in a European financial architect. He was building a federal case against me, which means I need to answer it in the same arena he chose. He set down the phone. I'm not going to fight a federal conspiracy with street-level tactics. I'm going to walk into a federal meeting with cleaner evidence than Victor ever dreamed of building, and I'm going to hand it over myself. He looked at Patrick. Get the documentation package ready for 11. You have 2 hours, Rosa said without looking up. Rosa, Patrick said. I'm working, she said. She was always... Clara had gone back to writing. She was on her 4th page now, filling it with the kind of detail that most people's memories simply did not retain: specific dates, specific language, the exact phrasing Victor had used in conversation 7 months ago, the precise sequence of events on each occasion she had noticed something wrong. It was like watching someone transcribe from a recording that only existed inside her own head. Anthony watched her for a moment. How do you remember all of it? He said. She didn't look up. I pay attention, she said simply. To everything? To everything that matters. She turned to the next page. Most people don't. They assume that because something seems small, it isn't worth retaining. But everything is connected. Small things are usually just large things that haven't finished growing yet. He was quiet for a moment. Is that something someone told you or something you figured out yourself? She looked up then. Just my mother, she said. She said it about people, not about financial records. But it applies. She went back to writing. He went back to his calls. The 3rd number he dialed was one he had never expected to use in a situation like this. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He left a message 15 seconds, precise, no names, and hung up. Then he sat back. And for the first time since 3 in the morning, he let himself feel the full weight of it. Victor. He kept coming back to it the way your tongue keeps finding the space where a tooth used to be, not because you want, but because the absence is so specific, so located that you can't help returning to it. 15 years. He had known Victor since Anthony was 31 years old and still learning how to run something larger than himself. Victor had been the person who showed him how to think at scale, how to see the whole board instead of individual pieces, how to build something that would last. And for 22 months, while they were having dinners and attending meetings and making decisions together, Victor had been systematically constructing Anthony's destruction. Not impulsively, not in anger. Deliberately, patiently, with the kind of cold calculation that required looking at a man you had spent 15 years beside and deciding that his removal was worth planning like an architectural project. That was what kept hitting Anthony, not the betrayal itself. He had experienced betrayal before. In his world, betrayal was almost an expected variable, a when, not an if. It was the patience of it. The sheer span of time Victor had spent sitting across from him, looking him in the eye, asking about his health and his daughter and his plans for the coming year, while underneath all of it, a clock was running. 22 months of that, Mr. Moretti. He looked up. Clara was watching him from across the table. She had stopped writing. Her pen was down. She was looking at him with that direct, steady attention that he had spent 9 years interpreting as professionalism and was only now understanding was something more personal than that. Don't, she said quietly. He looked at her. Whatever you're doing right now, she said, don't do it. Not yet. There's time for that later. Right now, you need to be sharp. He looked at her for a long moment. I'm fine, he said. I know you think you are, she said. She picked her pen back up. You're not. And that's completely reasonable given the circumstances. But we have 4 hours and 40 minutes until you meet with Agent Carver, and you need to think clearly for all of them. She looked at the coffee maker on the counter. I'll make better coffee this time. She stood up before he could respond, moved to the counter, and started looking through cabinets for supplies with the focused practicality of a woman who had been solving immediate problems her entire life. He watched her move around his kitchen, a space she had never been in before, a house she had never visited, a side of his life that had always been entirely separate from the version of him she knew, and she moved through it without hesitation or awkwardness, finding things, organizing things, making order out of unfamiliar space, the way she always did, in every space she entered. Rosa looked up from the laptop and watched Clara for a moment. Then she looked at Anthony. She raised one eyebrow. He gave her a look that said very clearly that whatever she was thinking, she should keep it to herself. Rosa returned to the laptop. It was 10:04. Clara made coffee. It was, as promised, significantly better than Anthony's. Nobody commented on this except Rosa, who took her cup without looking up and said, finally. At 10:22, Patrick found something that stopped the room. He had been cross-referencing the transaction timeline against Victor's official calendar, pulled from the company's internal scheduling system, which Clara had given him access to, when he found an appointment that did not match anything on record. 3 weeks ago, a private meeting logged under a generic notation at a hotel downtown. A hotel that, according to a credit card record Patrick had traced through the Reeves account, had a room booked that same night for a guest registered under a name that was one letter different from a known associate of the Ferrara organization. One letter. The kind of difference that was designed to be invisible at speed, but visible under scrutiny. They met in person, Patrick said, 3 weeks ago. Victor and a Ferrara representative in Chicago. Finalizing the timeline, Anthony said. That would be my read, Patrick said. If they were meeting in person at that stage, they were close to moving. The frame on Clara was probably already in place by then. They were coordinating the trigger. Anthony stood up. Can you prove the meeting? The credit card record establishes the room. I need security footage or a secondary witness to connect Victor to that specific meeting. Patrick looked at him, but the credit card alone, combined with everything else, is going to tell a very clear story. Get it into the package, Anthony said. He looked at the clock. 53 minutes until the meeting with Agent Carver. He turned to Clara. I need you to come with me, he said. She looked up from the table. She had been writing again. To the meeting, she said. You're the primary witness, he said. Everything Rosa and Patrick have compiled, it's verified, it's sourced, it's solid. But you're the person who found it. You're the person who was there. Carver is going to want to hear it from you directly. He paused. And she's going to look at you and decide in the first 2 minutes whether she believes you. So I need you to be in that room. Claire was quiet for a moment. I was arrested last night, she said. I know, a federal agent is going to look at me, and the first thing she's going to see is a woman who spent the night in jail because someone tried to use her as a pawn and it didn't work, he said. That's exactly what she's going to see, because that's exactly what happened. He held her gaze. Don't minimize it. Don't explain it away. Don't apologize for it. Just tell her what you found the way you've been telling me. Exactly like that. Clara looked at him. You trust me to do that, she said. It came out less like a question and more like something she was testing in the air, holding it up to see if it held weight. I brought you here, didn't I? He said. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she straightened her sweater, picked up her pen, and wrote 3 more lines on the legal pad with complete composure. Give me 10 minutes, she said. I want to finish this before we leave. He nodded. She wrote. At 10:47, Rosa printed the documentation package from a portable printer she had pulled from her bag, 43 pages, organized, tabbed, cross-referenced. She handed it to Patrick, who reviewed it for 6 minutes, made 2 notations in the margin, and handed it to Anthony. Anthony read the executive summary, then the account history, then the authorization trace. He read without expression, with the particular focus of a man who was preparing to walk into a room and make a case that had to be airtight before it touched the air. He found 2 questions. He asked both of them. Rosa answered both without hesitation. He had no more questions. This is solid, he said. It's better than solid, Rosa said. It's a conviction. It needs to be, he said. He stood up. Patrick was already pulling on his jacket. Rosa was shutting down the laptop, organizing her materials with the efficiency of long practice. Clara rose from the table. She picked up the legal pad, tore out her pages neatly along the perforation, squared them against the table, and placed them on top of the documentation package. 21 pages of handwritten detail, every word legible, every date precise. Anthony looked at the stack. Is there anything you forgot? He said. She thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. The coffee cup from 2019, she said. He looked at her. That's the only thing, she said. He almost said something. He stopped himself. He picked up the documentation package and walked toward the door. They left the safe house at 10:51. The drive to the attorney's office took 14 minutes. Nobody spoke for most of it. Patrick rode in the front passenger seat. Clara was in the back, sitting with the legal pad pages on her lap, reading back through what she had written with the focused calm of a person doing a final check before a high-stakes presentation. At one point, Patrick turned slightly in the front seat and said, without quite looking at Clara, when Carver asks you about the warehouse, and she will lead with what you were looking for, not with the arrest. Frame the action before the consequence. Clara looked up. Because if she hears the arrest first, she'll spend the next 5 minutes filtering everything through it. Patrick looked at her properly now. Exactly, he said. I know, Clara said. She went back to reading. Patrick turned back to face forward. He said nothing further. They arrived at the attorney's office at 11:03. Agent Carver was already there. She had arrived early, which told Anthony something about how seriously she had taken his call. She was 47, lean, with the kind of composure that came from years of sitting across from people who were trying to control a room and deciding not to let them. She looked at Anthony when he walked in. She looked at Clara. She looked at the documentation package under his arm. Mr. Moretti, she said. Agent Carver, he said, thank you for coming. He set the documentation package on the table. I want to introduce you to Clara Bennett. She is my executive secretary. She was arrested last night on charges that were fabricated by the person this documentation describes. She spent 6 hours in a county jail, and she used her time before I arrived to ensure that nothing she had compiled was lost. He paused. She's also the most detail-oriented person I have ever worked with, and I would like her to walk you through what she found because she can do it better than I can. Carver looked at Clara again. Clara sat down, placed her handwritten pages on the table in front of her, and folded her hands on top of them. Where would you like me to begin? She asked. Carver studied her for a moment. The arrest, the night in jail, the oversized sweater, the loose hair, the steady hands, the absolute absence of performance in anything about how she held herself. The beginning, Carver said. She sat down. Tell me everything. Clara told her everything. She spoke for 41 minutes without stopping, without notes except to confirm a specific date or account number from the pages in front of her, without a single contradiction or inconsistency. She described the first anomaly, the folder in the bottom drawer, the shell accounts, the authorization traces, the secondary terminal, Thomas Reeves and the Christmas party, Victor's request to remove names from a meeting attendee list, the warehouse, the car that was not her car, the evidence planted on her, all of it, in order, precisely. Carver did not interrupt. She made notes. She asked 3 clarifying questions, each of which Clara answered immediately and completely. At the end, Carver set down her pen. You compiled this over 7 months, she said. Yes, Clara said. Alone, yes. Without telling your employer. Without telling anyone, Clara said. Because I didn't know where the breach was. I knew it was internal. I knew it involved high-level authorization access. Until I had enough to be certain about the source, I couldn't risk disclosure. She met Carver's eyes. I understand how that sounds from your perspective. It sounds like someone who was protecting a criminal organization. I can't fully answer that concern except to show you everything I have, which I've done, and to let you make your own determination. She paused. But I'd ask you to consider that if I were protecting the organization, I wouldn't have been in that warehouse trying to pull records that exposed someone inside it. Carver looked at her for a long moment. No, she said slowly. You wouldn't. Anthony sat at the end of the table and said almost nothing. He had been in enough rooms to know that this one did not need him. This one belonged to Clara. He had brought her here because she was the witness. But watching her now, he understood that she didn't need his introduction or his framing or his presence to make this work. She would have walked into this room alone and made the same case, just as clearly, just as credibly, just as precisely. She simply would have had no way in without him. And that, he thought, was the most important thing he had contributed to this entire situation. Not the safe house, not Rosa or Patrick, not the phone calls or the timeline or the legal architecture of what came next. He had answered the phone. At 3 in the morning when it rang, he had answered it. He had driven through the rain. He had walked into that jail. He had sat down across from her and said, "Tell me what happened." That was it. Everything that followed had been Clara. Carver picked up the documentation package at 12:22. She leafed through it with the practiced speed of someone who knew how to read financial evidence. She stopped at the Ferrara connection. She read that page twice. Dominic Ferrara, she said. Emil Voss built the shell structure, Patrick said. We can walk you through the signature trace.
I know Emil Voss, Carver said quietly.
She said it the way someone says a name they have been waiting to say in the right room for a long time. She looked at Anthony. How long have you known about the Ferrara connection, she said. Since approximately 8:30 this morning, he said, 4 hours ago. And you called me at 9. I called you at 9, he said. She held his gaze. That's a significant choice, she said. Another long moment. Victor Callis, she said. Where is he right now? At his office, as far as I know, Anthony said. He expects to hear from me tomorrow. He believes the situation with Clara was contained last night. He doesn't know what she had already compiled before she went to the warehouse. He paused. He doesn't know about this meeting. How long before he finds out? Depends on how fast you move, Anthony said. Carver looked at the documentation package, then at Clara, then at Anthony. I need to make 2 calls, she said. She stood up. Don't leave this office until I come back. She walked out of the room. The attorney's office was quiet. Patrick exhaled. Rosa, who had been sitting in the corner reviewing her own materials, looked up and said nothing. Anthony looked at Clara across the table. She looked back at him. She believed you, he said. I told her the truth, Clara said. People can usually tell. Not always, he said. More often than you'd think, she said. He considered that. You weren't nervous, he said. She was quiet for a beat. I was terrified, she said simply. I just don't show it the same way other people do. She looked down at her handwritten pages. My mother always said that fear is useful information. It tells you that something matters. It's not a reason to stop. It's a reason to be more careful. She paused. I was very careful. He looked at her. Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman, he said. Something moved in Clara's face. Quiet and deep, the way something moves in a person's face when they love someone completely and carry that love in a place that doesn't often get touched. She is, Clara said. She's sick right now. Has been for about 8 months. That's part of why. She stopped. She reordered herself visibly the way she always did. That's part of why I didn't want to lose this job. The insurance, the stability. She didn't say it was self-pity. She said it the way she said everything, as fact, as information, as context that was relevant without being performative. Anthony was very still. She had been carrying all of this, the investigation, the fear, the risk, the sleepless nights of tracing shell accounts in secret while managing a sick mother and fighting to protect a job she couldn't afford to lose. And she had not said a word. Not Clara, he said. I'm fine, she said. That's not what I was going to say. She looked up. I was going to say, he said carefully, that you are not going to lose anything. Not your job, not your insurance, not any of it. Whatever you need for yourself and for your mother, I want you to tell me what it is and consider it handled. She looked at him for a long moment. Her jaw moved slightly, just barely. The particular movement of someone working very hard to keep their face composed when something inside them has shifted unexpectedly. You don't have to, she started. I know I don't have to, he said. That's exactly why I'm saying it. The door opened. Carver walked back in. She was moving differently than when she had walked out, with the particular energy of someone who had just been authorized to do something they have been wanting to do for a long time. I have a team being assembled now, she said. We're going to need everything you have, originals, copies, the full Rosa DiMartino verification documentation, and a formal witness statement from Ms. Bennett. She looked at Clara. I want that statement today. I can do it now, Clara said. Carver looked at Anthony. Victor Callahan's office and personal accounts are going to be frozen within the hour. His access to your systems needs to be revoked on your end simultaneously so he can't destroy records when he realizes what's happening. She paused. Can you do that without tipping him off? Anthony looked at Rosa. Rosa was already on her laptop. System access revoked in 6 minutes without triggering a visible notification, Rosa said, without looking up. He'll know when he tries to log in, not before. Carver looked at Rosa. Who are you, she said. His accountant, Rosa said. For how long? 20 years. Carver looked at Anthony. You have good people, she said. It sounded like it cost her something to say it. I'm aware of that, he said. More so than I was yesterday. He glanced at Clara when he said it. She was already handing her handwritten pages to Carver's outstretched hand, organized, squared, completely legible. Every single one. It was 12:41 in the afternoon. Victor Callahan had no idea that the room had already closed around him. He was still waiting for a tomorrow that was not coming. Because at 2 o'clock, in a conference room 3 blocks from his office, 6 federal agents were going to sit down with 43 pages of documentation, 21 pages of handwritten witness testimony, a USB drive, and a financial forensic expert who had been verifying the evidence since dawn. And by the time Victor tried to log into any of Anthony's systems to cover his tracks, he was going to find nothing but a locked door. Because a woman in an oversized sweater, who everyone had always overlooked, had already taken everything he needed to hide. And she had made copies. She always made copies. Victor Callahan had a routine that never changed. Every weekday at 1:15 in the afternoon, he ordered lunch from the same Italian restaurant 4 blocks from the office, the same table if he was eating in, the same order if he was eating at his desk. Chicken piccata, side of roasted vegetables, sparkling water with lemon. He had been doing it for 11 years. The restaurant knew his order before he finished saying his name. Routine was comfort. Routine was control. Routine was the thing that kept a man feeling steady when everything beneath him was moving. At 1:17, Victor's phone showed a failed login attempt on the Moretti Holdings internal network. He assumed it was a glitch. He tried again, failed again. He frowned at the screen, set his phone down, and told himself he would call IT after lunch. At 1:23, his personal attorney called him. Victor answered with the particular ease of a man who expected good news. What he got instead were 4 words that rearranged the architecture of his afternoon. Your accounts have been frozen. Victor was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Which accounts, he said. All of them, his attorney said. Personal, corporate, and the holdings under the Callahan Group umbrella. I got a call from your bank 12 minutes ago. This has federal fingerprints on it, Victor. I need to know right now if there is anything you haven't told me. Victor stood up from his desk. He walked to his office window and looked out at the street below and said very quietly, call me back in 10 minutes. He ended the call. He stood at the window for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and dialed Anthony. The phone rang. And rang and rang. He tried again, voicemail. He stood completely still for 4 seconds. Then he put the phone in his pocket, picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, and walked out of his office with the measured, unhurried pace of a man who had decided that the most important thing he could do right now was not appear to be leaving in a hurry. His assistant looked up as he passed her desk. Cancel my afternoon, he said pleasantly. Something came up. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button. He waited. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at the screen. It was a text from Thomas Reeves, 3 words. Call me now. The elevator opened. Victor stepped in. The doors closed behind him. He did not call Thomas Reeves. He already knew what Thomas was going to say. He had known from the moment his accounts were frozen that the timeline had accelerated beyond his control. The question was not what had happened. The question was how much they knew, and who had told them, and how long he had before the window closed entirely. Clara. It came back to Clara. He had been so certain the frame was clean. The car, the documents, the circumstances of her arrest, all of it had been designed with the kind of precision that should have held under any reasonable scrutiny. She was supposed to be in a cell. She was supposed to be processing the shock of an arrest, scrambling for a lawyer, focused entirely on her own situation. She was not supposed to have Anthony Moretti personally pulling her out of jail at 4 a.m. and driving her through the city in the rain. He had underestimated her. Not her intelligence, he had always known she was sharp. What he had underestimated was her courage. He had assumed that a woman who apologized when someone bumped into her, who cried when people raised their voices, who hid behind oversized sweaters and never drew attention to herself, he had assumed that woman would fold under pressure. He had been wrong, and the cost of being wrong was walking toward him right now in the form of federal agents and frozen accounts, and a phone that Anthony Moretti was not answering. The elevator reached the lobby. Victor walked out. He crossed the marble floor with his jacket over his arm, and his face arranged into an expression of calm purpose. He pushed through the front door. He stopped. There were 2 men standing on the sidewalk. They were not police officers, no uniforms, no marked vehicle. But they had the particular stillness of men who were positioned, not passing, and the particular quality of attention that Victor had learned to recognize over 15 years of being adjacent to dangerous situations. They were looking at him. Mr. Callahan, the closer one said. He held up identification. I'm Special Agent Marcus Webb, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We'd like you to come with us. Victor looked at the identification. He looked at the street. He looked at the building behind him. He thought about running. It lasted approximately 1 second. Of course, he said. He put his jacket back on. Let me just call my attorney. You're welcome to do that in the car, Agent Webb said. Victor was driven to a federal building on the north side. He was placed in a conference room, not a cell, not an interrogation room, a conference room, which his attorney later told him was a courtesy he should not mistake for friendliness. His attorney arrived 40 minutes later, reviewed the situation in under 10 minutes, and then sat across from Victor with the expression of a man who had just been handed something he did not want. How much do they have? Victor asked. His attorney set a folder on the table. Victor, he said carefully, I need you to understand something before I answer that question. What I'm about to tell you is not a legal assessment. It's a fact. And the fact is that the question you just asked me, how much do they have, is the wrong question. Victor looked at him. The right question, his attorney said, is whether there is anything they don't have. And based on what I've been told about the documentation package that was submitted to the FBI this morning. He paused. He chose his next words very deliberately. I don't think there is. The room was quiet. Victor sat back in his chair. He was thinking about Clara Bennett at her desk. The way she sat, always straight, always organized, always slightly apart from whatever noise was happening around her. The way she filed things. The way she never threw anything away. The way she had been there every single day for 9 years, steady and quiet and invisible and recording everything. He had walked past her 1,000 times. He had spoken freely around her because she was just the secretary. He had never once in 9 years considered the possibility that the most dangerous person in that office was the woman nobody looked at twice. At 2:47 that afternoon, Thomas Reeves was picked up at his home in the suburbs. He did not go quietly. He went in exactly the way a frightened man goes when the thing he was afraid of arrives at his front door, and he has no prepared response for it, loudly, with excuses and denials, and a voice that climbed progressively higher with each sentence. His wife stood in the doorway and watched him be put into a federal vehicle, and she called Victor's sister, and Victor's sister called Victor's attorney, and by 3 o'clock the Callahan family was in the particular kind of crisis that does not resolve quickly and does not leave things the way they were before. Anthony heard about Reeves from Patrick at 3:04. He was back at the safe house with Clara and Rosa, working through a secondary review of the documentation, cross-checking Clara's witness statement against the verified financial records to ensure perfect alignment before the formal federal interview scheduled for the following morning. When Patrick's text came through, Anthony read it, set his phone face down on the table, and said nothing for a moment. Clara was watching him. "Reeves," she asked. "Picked up at home," he said. She nodded once. She went back to the documents. She did not celebrate. She did not say anything about justice or satisfaction or any of the things people say when something they have worked toward arrives. She just continued working, because continuing to work was what the situation required. And Clara Bennett did not stop doing what the situation required because a piece of good news had arrived. There would be time for everything else later. Right now, the documentation still needed to be perfect. Anthony watched her for a moment. Then he went back to the documents too. At 3:41, Agent Carver called. "Victor Callahan is cooperating," she said. Anthony was quiet. "He gave us Ferrara," she said. "Not everything he's negotiating, but enough for us to move on the New York operation. He gave us 3 names, 2 account numbers, and confirmed the meeting at the hotel 3 weeks ago." She paused. "He also confirmed that the plan was to hand your complete financial framework over Ferrara's organization once the federal charges against you were filed and your assets were under seizure review. Ferrara would have moved in within 72 hours of your arrest." Anthony absorbed this. "How long had Victor been in contact with Ferrara before he came to you with this plan?" he asked. A pause on the line. "According to Callahan, Ferrara approached him 31 months ago," Carver said. "Not 22. He spent the first 9 months deciding whether to do it. 31 months. Nearly 3 years. For 3 years, Victor Callahan had been sitting with a choice. For 9 months, he had considered it. And then for 22 months, he had executed it, one careful step at a time, while sitting at dinner and talking about loyalty." "Agent Carver," Anthony said, "yes, the charges against Clara Bennett. Already being reviewed for dismissal," she said. "Given the documentation of the planted vehicle and fabricated evidence, the county DA is not going to pursue. I expect the formal notice within 24 hours. She paused. "She did good work, Mr. Moretti. Very good work, I know," he said. He ended the call. He looked across the table at Clara, who had not stopped reviewing documents and therefore did not know yet that the charges against her were being dismissed, that the thing she had been carrying since the moment those police officers found her at the warehouse was about to be officially set down. "Clara," he said. She looked up. "The charges are being dismissed," he said. "It'll be formal tomorrow, but it's done." She looked at him. She held the look for a moment that was slightly longer than her usual composure would have required. Just slightly. Just enough to show that something underneath the steadiness had moved. "Okay," she said. Her voice was even, completely even. She looked back down at the documents. Then she set her pen down. She pressed both hands flat on the table. She looked at a fixed point on the wall in front of her and breathed one breath, slow and deliberate, and Anthony understood in that moment that this was what Clara Bennett looked like when she was letting herself feel something. Not visibly, not with tears or a change in expressions. Just a breath, a pause, a moment where she allowed the weight she had been carrying to register fully before she picked it back up. He did not say anything. He did not look away. He simply let her have the moment without making her explain it or perform it or apologize for it. After 5 seconds, she picked up her pen. She continued working. Rosa, from the corner, said nothing, But she reached across the table and placed her hand briefly on Clara's forearm 1 second, no more, and then returned to her own work. It was 4:02. Outside the safe house, in the larger world, things were moving fast. Federal agents were executing warrants. Accounts were being traced. The Ferrara organization in New York was beginning to feel the first tremors of an investigation that had just acquired significantly more foundation than it had 24 hours ago. Emil Voss, in Vienna, would not yet know that his client had cooperated, but that information would reach him within hours, and when it did, the decision he would need to make about his own situation would be equally urgent. Inside the safe house, 3 people sat at a kitchen table and finished building a documentation package that was going to be used in federal proceedings for the next 2 years. At 5:28, Anthony's phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was his daughter, Lucia. He had not spoken to her since the previous afternoon. She was 24, lived in a condo 3 miles from the penthouse, and had her mother's instincts for knowing when something was wrong without being told. He picked up. "Papa," she said. Her voice had the particular careful quality of someone who has been trying not to call for several hours and has finally stopped trying. "I heard something at lunch today. About Clara. Someone said she was arrested last night." "She's fine," he said. "She's with me." A pause. "Is she okay?" He looked at Clara across the table. Clara was writing and had not looked up. "She's the reason we're all fine," he said. Another pause. "Different quality this time." "Papa," Lucia said carefully. "How long has Clara worked for you?" 9 years, he said. "And you're just now calling her by her first name, without thinking about it," Lucia said. Anthony said nothing. "I'm just making an observation," Lucia said. "She sounded like Rosa." "I'll call you tonight," he said. "I know you will," she said. She hung up. Anthony set the phone down. He did not look at Clara. He looked at the documentation package. Rosa, who had excellent hearing and absolutely no self-control when it came to using it, made a small sound that was not quite a laugh and returned her eyes immediately to her laptop. It was 5:44 when the final document was completed, reviewed, and organized into the formal submission package for the federal proceedings. Rosa closed her laptop. Patrick stacked the hard copy materials and secured them in his briefcase. The USB drive, Clara's copy, the one she had produced from the pocket of her sweater at 4:30 in the morning while sitting in Anthony's car in the rain, was logged as primary evidence. They sat for a moment in the particular quiet that settles after a long, intense effort reaches its end point. Rosa spoke first. "I'm going home," she said. "I'm 61 years old, and I've been awake since 5 in the morning, and I made better coffee than my employer." She stood up, picked up her bag, and looked at Clara. "I want you to know," she said, in the direct, no decoration way that Rosa DiMartino said everything, "that what you did was exceptional. Not just the work. The decision to do it alone, the way you carried it, the way you held up in that meeting this morning, all of it. Exceptional." She paused. "I've worked for this organization for 20 years, and I have seen a great many people do a great many impressive things. I want you to understand where this ranks." Clara looked at her. "Where?" she said. "At the top," Rosa said simply. She picked up her bag. The door closed. Patrick stood, shook Anthony's hand, and nodded to Clara. "Get some sleep," he said to both of them, a tone that made clear he considered this actual medical advice. Then he left. And then it was just Anthony and Clara in the kitchen of the safe house, with an empty legal pad and a clean table, and the particular silence of a day that had contained more than most weeks. Clara was looking at her hands. "You should go home," Anthony said. "I know," she said. Neither of them moved. "Your car is still in impound," he said. "I know that too. I'll drive you." She looked up. "You don't, Clara," he said. He said it the way he'd been saying her name all day, without distance, without the professional formality of 9 years of employer and employee. Just her name, like it meant something specific. She stopped. "Let me drive you home," he said, "and then I want you to sleep. And tomorrow morning, when the formal dismissal comes through on the charges, I want you to come back to the office." He paused. "Not to your old desk. We'll talk about what comes next. But I want you there." She studied him carefully. "What does what comes next mean?" she said. She asked it without hope and without apprehension, just with the precise need for information that had always characterized every question she asked. He thought about it honestly. "It means that I've been running an organization for 30 years, he said, "and I have just spent the last 16 hours discovering that the most important decisions being made inside that organization have been made by a woman who was answering my phones." He looked at her steadily. "That's not something I can unknow, and I don't want to." She held his gaze. "I was also filing your papers," she said, "and making my coffee," he said. "Badly the first time. The second time was better. The second time was excellent, she said with quiet precision. Something in the room shifted, not dramatically, not with the weight of a declaration or a revelation, just the particular shift of two people who have been through something significant together and are sitting on the other side of it, and finding with some surprise that the other side is not quite the same shape as where they started. I want to ask you something, Clara said. Go ahead. She looked at the table for a moment, then at him. Last night, she said, when the officer called you, you didn't send a lawyer. She paused. You didn't even call one first. You just came. She held his gaze. Why? He thought about it. Not because the answer was complicated. Because he wanted to give her the true answer, not the first answer, and sometimes those were different things. Because you called me, he said finally. Not a lawyer, not a family member, me. With one phone call. After being in that jail for 2 hours. You're the most precise person I know. You don't make choices without reasons. Which meant you had a reason for that choice. And I needed to understand what it was. He looked at her. Because? She said quietly. Because somewhere in the last 9 years, he said, you became someone I would go to, without thinking about it, without calculating anything. Just go to. He said it plainly, the way he said things, when he had decided to stop managing the distance between the truth and the version of it that was easier to live with. I didn't know that until the phone rang. But the phone rang and I already knew. Clara was very still. The kitchen was very quiet. She looked at him for a long moment with that direct, undeflecting gaze that had always read as professional composure and was, he now understood, simply Clara looking at something she considered important without looking away from it. 9 years is a long time not to know something, she said softly. I knew, she said. He looked at her. Not everything, she said carefully, but enough. Enough to know that when I found what Victor was doing, and when I understood what it was going to cost you if I didn't stop it, there was never a moment where I considered not trying. She paused. Because it was you. She said it simply, without making it larger than it was or smaller than it was. Just the fact of it stated clearly the way Clara stated everything. Anthony was quiet for a moment. Then he said, your mother. She looked at him, slightly surprised by the turn. You said she's been sick for 8 months, he said. What does she need? Clara blinked. She recalibrated. She needs consistent in-home care, she said. 3 days a week. Her insurance covers partial, full coverage, he said. 5 days, whatever specialist she needs. I'll have it arranged tomorrow. He said it the way he arranged things, not as an offer, not as a gift requiring acceptance, just as a statement of what was going to happen. That's not negotiable, Clara. Don't argue with me about it. She looked at him for a long moment. Her chin moved slightly. Just barely. She's going to love you, she said. Her voice was not quite steady. For the first time all day, it was not quite steady. Then I look forward to meeting her, he said. She pressed her lips together. She looked at the ceiling for 1 second. Then she looked back at him with eyes that were perfectly clear and a composure that had rebuilt itself in real time. Ready, he said. Yes, she said. They left the safe house at 6:19. The drive to Clara's apartment took 22 minutes. The city was in the full momentum of early evening traffic, thick lights coming on, the particular energy of a place that had been moving all day and hadn't decided to slow down yet. They talked during the drive. Not about Victor or Ferrara or federal proceedings or documentation packages. They talked about smaller things. His daughter Lucia and the way she said everything slightly sideways before she said what she actually meant. Clara's mother and the inexplicable loyalty she maintained to a soap opera she had been watching for 32 years. The terrible coffee that had started the morning. Small things. Real things. The kind of things that accumulate over 9 years of proximity and never quite get said because the structure of employer and employee doesn't leave room for them and then gets said all at once when the structure has been rearranged by 16 hours of crisis and honesty and driving through rain. He pulled up in front of her building. She gathered her things, the legal pad, her phone, the pen she had been writing with since 5 in the morning, the manila envelope from the jail containing her personal effects. She reached for the door handle. Clara, he said. She stopped, looked at him. Thank you, he said. He said it simply. No performance, no weight beyond what it was. Just 2 words said clearly to someone who had earned them fully. She looked at him, she said. That was enough. She opened the door. She got out. She walked toward her building with the same straight spine and steady step she always had, the same composure she had maintained through every hour of a day that would have broken most people before noon. She reached the front door. She stopped, turned, looked back at the car. She gave him one small, definitive nod. He nodded back. She went inside. He sat in the car for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone. He had one more thing to do tonight. He dialed a number that he had not dialed in a very long time, a direct line to a man in New York who had always functioned as a neutral intermediary between Chicago and the Ferrara organization. A man who operated in the spaces between organizations and was trusted very specifically because he had never been caught using that position for anything other than message delivery. The man answered. "I have a message for Ferrara," Anthony said. "Tell him that the package he was expecting to receive from Chicago is not coming. Tell him that the arrangement he made is over. Tell him that the person he made the arrangement with is currently sitting in a federal conference room." He paused. "And tell him that the next time he decides to build a 22-month plan against me, he should use an architect who doesn't have a recognizable signature." He ended the call. He sat for a moment longer. He thought about Victor at a dinner table talking about loyalty. He thought about a woman in an oversized sweater, filling a legal pad at 5 in the morning in a kitchen that wasn't hers, on 2 hours of sleep after 6 hours in a jail cell because she thought it was right. He thought about what the word loyalty actually meant. He put the car in drive. He drove home through a city that was moving on without knowing anything had changed. But something had. Something significant. And it had started as most significant things do, with one person deciding to do the right thing even when nobody was watching. Even when nobody would have noticed if she hadn't. Even when the cost of doing it was a police station at midnight and a cell with a flickering light and one phone call. One phone call. To the right number. And everything that followed from it. The formal dismissal arrived at 9:47 the following morning. Clara was sitting at her kitchen table when her phone rang, not the safe house kitchen, not Anthony's kitchen, her own kitchen, in her own apartment, with her mother's favorite blue mug on the counter and the soap opera playing quietly on the television in the next room because her mother liked the sound of it, even when she was sleeping. The call lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, Clara set the phone down on the table and sat very still for a moment. The charges were gone, all of them. Formally, officially, completely, as though the arrest had never happened, as though the county jail and the flickering light and the 6 hours of sitting with her hands folded had been a bad dream that the morning had decided to correct. She sat with that for exactly as long as she allowed herself. Then she got up, went to her mother's room, and stood in the doorway. Eleanor Bennett was 71 years old and had been battling a condition that had made the past 8 months the most difficult of her life. And she had faced those 8 months the same way she had faced everything else in 68 years of living before it, with stubbornness and humor and the particular refusal to be diminished by something just because it was bigger than her. She was awake, propped against her pillows, watching her soap opera with the focused investment of someone tracking a complex geopolitical situation. She looked up when Clara appeared in the doorway. Eleanor Bennett had her daughter's eyes, or rather, Clara had her mother's eyes, that direct, steady, miss-nothing quality that had always made people slightly uneasy when they expected to be looked at casually and found themselves looked at fully instead. "You look like something happened," Eleanor said. "Something happened," Clara agreed. "Good something or bad something?" Clara thought about the last 32 hours. The warehouse, the police, the jail cell, the phone call, the safe house, Rosa and Patrick and Agent Carver, the documentation package, the 41 minutes of testimony, Victor Callahan's frozen accounts, the drive home, the thing Anthony had said in the car that she had been carrying carefully since the moment he said it, the way you carry something fragile when you're not yet sure of the ground beneath your feet. "Both," she said. But it ended good. Eleanor studied her daughter with the precision of a woman who had been reading Clara's face for 39 years and knew every variation of every expression she was capable of making, including the ones Clara thought she was successfully concealing. "Who is he?" Eleanor said. Clara looked at her. "I didn't say anything about a person," Clara said. "You didn't have to," Eleanor said. She picked up the remote and turned the television down. "Sit down and tell me." Clara sat down on the edge of the bed. She told her mother. Not everything, not the parts that belonged to a world her mother didn't need to carry, but the shape of it, the truth of it. The warehouse and the arrest and the phone call, and Anthony walking into that jail at 4 in the morning without sending anyone ahead of him. What he had said in the kitchen of the safe house, what he had said in the car. Eleanor listened without interrupting. She had always been a good listener, the kind that listened with her full attention and did not use the time while you were talking to prepare what she was going to say next. When Clara finished, Eleanor was quiet for a moment. 9 years, she said. 9 years, Clara confirmed. And he came himself. He came himself. Eleanor looked at her daughter. Baby, she said gently, that man has been in love with you for at least 3 of those 9 years, and he just needed a crisis to figure it out. Mama Clara said. I'm not being romantic, Eleanor said. I'm being accurate. There's a difference. She reached out and took Clara's hand. The question isn't whether he sees you now. It's whether you're going to let yourself be seen. Clara looked at their joined hands. I've always been there, she said quietly. He just wasn't looking. Most people aren't looking, Eleanor said, until they are. And when they finally looked, she squeezed Clara's hand. That's when it counts. Clara sat with that. Her mother turned the television back up. Your boss is sending home care, Eleanor said, as if this were simply another item on a list. 5 days a week, you said. Starting next week, Clara said. Eleanor nodded. With the particular dignity of a woman accepting help she needs, without pretending she doesn't need it, and without making anyone feel bad for offering it. He has good manners, she said. He has complicated manners, Clara said. That's the same thing, Eleanor said at a certain age. Clara almost laughed. It came out small and surprised, the way laughter does when it arrives before you've decided to let it. She kissed her mother's forehead and went to get ready for work. She wore a different sweater, same color, different fit. Not because anyone had told her to change. Because she felt this morning like a different version of herself than the woman who had left this apartment 32 hours ago, not changed in the ways that mattered, not changed in the ways that ran deep, but shifted. Like a photograph that has been slightly reframed. The subject is the same. The light is different. She arrived at the office at 10:53. The lobby felt different. Not the space itself, the marble floors and the security desk and the elevator bank were all exactly where they had always been. But the people moved differently around her. The security guard at the front desk, who had seen her walk through this lobby every working day for 9 years, and whose only consistent acknowledgement had been a perfunctory nod, stood up when she came through the door. Miss Bennett, he said. Good morning, she stopped. Good morning, Gerald, she said carefully. He held the elevator for her. She stepped in, the doors closed. She stood alone in the elevator and thought about that. Gerald had worked that desk for 6 years. In 6 years, he had learned her name and never used it. This morning, he had used it and stood up. Word had traveled. The way word always traveled in organizations, not through official announcements or formal communications, but through the particular underground current of people talking to people in hallways and break rooms and quiet corners, assembling a picture from fragments. What they had assembled, apparently, was enough to produce a different posture from a man who had spent 6 years not quite seeing her. The elevator opened on the executive floor. She stepped out. The floor was quiet at this hour. Most of the senior staff did not arrive until 11 or later, but the two people who were already at their desks both looked up when she walked through the glass doors. Both of them held the look for a beat longer than usual. One of them, a junior associate named Daniel, who had been with the company for 8 months, and who Clara had helped orient during his first week, said, Good morning, Miss Bennett, with the careful respect of someone who has recently recalibrated something important. She walked to her desk. It had been cleaned, not by her. Someone had straightened the files, replaced the broken things. There were marks on the surface where Victor's ransacking had left evidence, and the frame that had been destroyed, her mother's photograph, had been replaced. Not with the same photograph, with a new print of the same image in a new frame placed in exactly the position the original had occupied. She stood at her desk for a moment and looked at it. She picked it up, her mother, 20 years younger, laughing at something the camera had not caught. She set it back down carefully. She sat. She powered on her computer. She began to work. It was what she did. It was what she had always done. Whatever the circumstances, whatever the weight of the previous day, or the uncertainty of the next one, she sat down and she did the work because the work was real and present and required, and she was the person who knew how to do it. 40 minutes later, Anthony arrived. She heard the elevator before she saw him, the particular sound of the doors opening, the particular quality of his footsteps on the marble floor outside the glass doors, the pattern she had memorized without trying to over 9 years of listening for it every morning. He pushed through the glass doors. He was wearing a dark suit, no tie. He looked like a man who had slept 4 hours and would not acknowledge it under any circumstances. His eyes found her immediately across the length of the office, and the thing that happened in them when they landed on her was not the brisk assessment of an employer confirming that his secretary had arrived on time. It was something quieter than that and more specific, and she felt it from across the room before he had taken another step. He walked to her desk and stopped. You're here, he said. You told me to come, she said. I know what I told you. He looked at her. I'm fine, she said. Then she paused. I'm actually fine, not performing fine, actually fine. Good, he said. He looked at her desk, at the photograph. He had arranged a replacement himself. She understood or had arranged for it to be arranged. Because it was the kind of detail that most people would miss, and he had not missed it. Thank you, she said. She meant the photograph. He understood she meant the photograph. Come into the office, he said. We need to talk. She followed him in. He held the door. She sat in the chair across from his desk, the same chair she had always sat in when they met, and he sat in his own chair and looked at her across the desk that had been the formal boundary between them for 9 years. He folded his hands on the desk. I want to offer you a new position, he said. She waited. Director of Internal Operations, he said. You would have oversight of all financial reporting, compliance, vendor relationships, and internal audit functions. Full executive authority in those areas. A team under you, people you choose. An office on this floor. He paused. And a salary that reflects what you've actually been doing for the last 9 years, which is considerably more than what the title of secretary suggests. Clara looked at him. That's a significant restructure, she said. It's an accurate restructure, he said. The position was always the wrong one. The job description never matched what you were actually doing or what you were actually capable of. I'm correcting that. She was quiet for a moment. People are going to have questions, she said. A secretary doesn't typically become director of internal operations in the span of a week. People can ask their questions, he said. The answer is straightforward. I identified someone in the organization who was performing at a level far above her current role, and I promoted her accordingly. He held her gaze. That's not an unusual story. It only seems unusual because people stop looking. She considered that. There will be people on this floor who will resist it, she said. Executives who have been here for years. People who have their own ideas about hierarchy and who belongs where. Probably, he said. That doesn't concern you. It concerns me less than the alternative, he said, which is leaving someone with your capabilities in a role that doesn't use them, because other people's comfort is more important than accuracy. He looked at her steadily. I've made that mistake for 9 years. I'm not continuing it. She looked at the desk between them. The space that had always represented something clear and understood the boundary, the role, the structure that made everything else make sense. Anthony, she said. It was the first time she had used his first name. Not Mr. Moretti, not the professional formality of 9 years. His name said quietly, as though she had been holding it at a certain distance for a long time, and had decided this morning that the distance was no longer necessary. He noticed. His expression didn't change, but something in it shifted, the particular shift of a man hearing something he had not expected and finding it far more significant than he had prepared himself for. Yes, he said. This is going to be complicated, she said. She said it plainly, without drama, because that was how real things were said between people who had been honest with each other through 16 hours of crisis, and were not about to stop now. I know that, he said. The professional part, she paused, choosing words. The other part, keeping them separate, making it work. People are going to watch both of us to see if it's possible, and they're going to be looking for proof that it isn't. Let them look, he said. That's not an answer, she said. It's a starting point, he said. The answer is that I'm aware of the complications, and I'm not asking you to navigate them alone. I'm asking you to navigate them with me. He paused, which is different. She looked at him for a long moment. My mother thinks you have good manners, she said. Something moved in his face, a flash of something that was almost surprise, and then almost something warmer. When did you speak to your mother about me, he said. This morning, she said. She has opinions about most things. Most good mothers do, he said. She'd like to meet you, Clara said carefully. At some point, when it's appropriate. She doesn't expect. She stopped, reorganizing. She just said that she'd like to meet the man who came himself. He was quiet. I'd like that, he said simply. No performance. No management of distance. Just a plain statement of a man who meant what he said. She nodded once. All right, she said. I'll take the position. Good, he said. I want to choose my own team, she said. I said as much, he said. And I want Rosa DiMartino formally attached to my department, she said. Not as a shared resource. Mine specifically, he looked at her. Rosa has been an independent contractor for 20 years, he said. Then offer her a good enough reason to change that, Clara said. She's 61 years old and she's been solving problems for this organization for 2 decades without credit or security or a title that reflects what she actually does. Sound familiar? He held her gaze. I'll call her this afternoon, he said. Good, she said. She stood up. She smoothed the front of her sweater. She looked at him across the desk, across the space, That was no longer quite the boundary it had been an hour ago. That was becoming something different, something still being determined, something that would take time and care and the particular patience of two people who both understood that the best things are built carefully. I have work to do, she said. So do I, he said. She turned and walked to the door. He said. She stopped. The photograph on your desk, he said. The frame, I had them source the same style. I wasn't certain they got it exactly right. She thought about the frame, the weight of it in her hands this morning, the way it sat on the corner of the desk in exactly the right position. They got it right, she said. She went back to her desk. She worked. It was what she did. It was perhaps the truest thing about her that in the middle of everything, in the aftermath of crisis and exhaustion, and the particular vertigo of a life that had shifted significantly on its axis in the space of 32 hours, she sat down and she did the work, not because she had to, not because someone required it of her, because the work was how she understood her own usefulness in the world, and understanding her own usefulness mattered to her in a way that had nothing to do with what anyone else thought about it. That afternoon at 2 o'clock, Anthony held a brief meeting with his senior executives. Clara was not in the room. She did not need to be. She was at her desk, handling the backlog that had accumulated during her absence, moving through it with the focused efficiency that was simply her natural speed. She heard it secondhand from Daniel, who appeared at the edge of her desk with the expressions from someone trying to appear casual while delivering significant information. Mr. Moretti announced a restructure, Daniel said. New Director of Internal Operations position. He said he'd be naming someone from within the organization. He paused. He said the appointment reflects a correction long overdue. Clara continued typing. Okay, she said. He said the appointment is effective immediately, Daniel said. Okay, she said again. Ms. Bennett, Daniel said carefully. It's you. She looked up. Daniel was watching her with the particular expression, someone waiting to see how a person responds to something they have clearly known was coming, but that still carries weight when it becomes official. He was 26 years old and he had good instincts, and she had noticed that about him from his first week. I know, she said. She looked at him for a moment. And I have a lot of work to do, she said, as do you. Go back to your desk, Daniel. He went, but he was smiling when he went, and she noticed that too. By the time the senior staff filed back out of the conference room and crossed the executive floor, the particular current of information had done its work. She could feel it not in any dramatic way, not in whispers or pointed looks, but in the small recalibrations of posture and greeting that happen when a room adjusts its understanding of someone. An executive who had walked past her desk for 3 years without acknowledgement stopped and said, "Good afternoon," with the careful courtesy of someone making a correction. A woman from the compliance team who had once sent Clara a task request with the subject line, "Just a quick thing for the secretary," appeared at her desk with the expression of someone who had reviewed their past behavior and found it wanting. Clara was gracious to all of them, not because she had forgotten anything. She had not forgotten anything, she never forgot anything. But she understood that the work of changing how a room sees you is not done by reminding the room of its past failures. It is done by giving them something better to look at now. By being so clearly, so consistently, so undeniably the person in the room had failed to recognize that the failure becomes self-evident without anyone having to say so. So she was gracious, she was professional, she was exactly who she had always been, and the room recalibrated. 6 weeks later, the federal proceedings against Victor Callahan moved into their formal phase. Thomas Reeves entered a cooperation agreement. Emil Voss was arrested at his apartment in Vienna and transferred to U.S. custody within 10 days. The Ferrara investigation in New York expanded significantly, absorbing 3 additional targets who had been under surveillance but not yet actionable. The documentation package that Rosa DiMartino had completed in 3 hours in a safe house kitchen, verified against 43 pages of sourced financial evidence and supplemented by 21 pages of handwritten testimony from Clara Bennett, was cited by the federal prosecution as the most comprehensive privately assembled evidence package they had encountered in the investigation of financial crimes in the past decade. Agent Dana Carver, in a private call to Anthony that she did not acknowledge in any official capacity, said 3 words about Clara before hanging up. "Keep her close," she said. Anthony did not respond immediately. He looked across the length of the executive floor to where Clara was standing at the window outside her new office, the one on the north side with the good light, the one she had chosen without hesitation when he told her to pick talking on the phone with her hand moving the way it moved, when she was explaining something complicated and wanted to make sure the person on the other end was tracking every step. I intend to, he said. Rosa DiMartino accepted the formal appointment to Clara's department on a Thursday morning. She showed up at 9 a.m. with her own good coffee, excellent coffee, the kind that required a specific machine and specific beans set it on the desk Clara had designated as hers, and said, without preamble, what do we need to fix first? Clara looked up from her own desk. The vendor authorization process, she said. It has 3 unnecessary approval layers that create lag without adding security. I've thought that for 4 years, Rosa said. I know, Clara said. I read your memo. Rosa looked at her. Nobody read that memo, Rosa said. I read everything, Clara said. Rosa sat down, pulled out her laptop, and opened it. I think I'm going to enjoy working for you, she said. Rosa looked up. With me, Clara repeated. Not for me. Rosa held her gaze for a moment. Something in her expression moved something quiet and real, and the kind of thing that Rosa DiMartino, who had spent 61 years being precise about language and exact about everything, recognized immediately as the right word chosen for the right reason. With you, Rosa agreed. She went back to her laptop. 3 months after the night of the phone call, Anthony's daughter Lucia organized a dinner. Small, informal, at a restaurant that required a reservation 3 weeks in advance and was worth every day of the wait. She said it was a family dinner. She did not explain further. Anthony arrived to find Lucia already seated, and across from her someone he had not expected. Clara, who looked, he had time to observe before she saw him, like someone who had been mildly ambushed but had decided within the first 30 seconds to find it acceptable. She was wearing something he had not seen her in before, not office clothes, not the sweaters and dark slacks of the working day, but something that belonged to a different version of an evening, a lighter version, and it suited her in the way that things suit a person when they have stopped dressing for invisibility and started dressing for themselves. She looked up and saw him. She did not apologize for being there. She did not look away. She said, "Your daughter is relentless." "I know," he said. He sat down. Lucia looked between the two of them with the expression of a young woman who has accomplished exactly what she intended and is being restrained enough not to say so. She lasted approximately 4 minutes before she said, "To Clara, he talks about you every time I call him." "Lucia," Anthony said. "He doesn't think I notice." Lucia said, "To Clara, but I always notice." Clara looked at Anthony. He held her gaze with the particular steadiness of a man who had decided some weeks ago that managing the distance between what was true and what was easy was no longer worth the energy it required. "She's not wrong," he said. Clara looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked back up. The corner of her mouth moved. "I know," she said. Lucia looked like she was going to say something else. Anthony looked at her. She picked up her menu instead. They had dinner, the 3 of them. Real dinner, with real conversation, the kind that moves easily between serious things and small things, between the past and the present, between what has happened and what comes next. Lucia asked Clara about her mother and listened with genuine interest and asked follow-up questions that revealed she had already somehow learned more about Eleanor Bennett than Clara had told her. Clara asked Lucia about her work. She was in her 2nd year of a graduate program in urban policy, and Lucia talked about it with the particular passion of someone who has found the thing they are supposed to be doing. And Clara asked questions that made Lucia talk for 12 unbroken minutes about her thesis. Anthony mostly listened. He watched Clara and his daughter talk, and he thought about a woman he had spent 9 years not fully seeing, and he thought about what that cost him, not in the crisis sense, not in the Victor Callahan sense, but in the quieter sense of years of conversation not had, of a person not known, of the particular waste of proximity without attention. He was paying attention now. At the end of the evening, Lucia hugged Clara before she hugged him, which he noted, and which Lucia absolutely intended him to note. On the sidewalk outside, while Lucia had gone to retrieve her car, Anthony and Clara stood side by side in the cold air of a Chicago November. "Your daughter is extraordinary," Clara said. "She ambushed you," he said. "She invited me to dinner," Clara said. The ambush part was incidental. She paused. "I liked it," he looked at her. "Clara," he said. "Don't overthink it," she said. "I'm not," he said. "You are," she said. "I can tell because you said my name in that particular way." She looked at him, direct and clear, no distance between the truth and the saying of it. "Whatever comes next, we figure it out. Like we figured out everything else. Together, carefully, without rushing anything that shouldn't be rushed." She paused. "That's enough for right now, isn't it?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. She nodded. Lucia's car appeared at the curb. Clara said good night and walked to the car and got in, and Lucia immediately said something that made Clara put her face in her hand. He could see it through the window, and then they drove away, and he stood on the sidewalk and watched the taillights disappear around the corner. He stood there for a moment. He thought about a phone ringing at 3 in the morning. He thought about driving through rain. He thought about a woman in an oversized sweater, sitting with her hands folded in a county jail, who had used her one phone call to protect the person she was trying to protect. He thought about 9 years of proximity without attention. He thought about what had changed. He thought about what had not. Because the truth was that Clara Bennett had not changed. She had always been exactly who she was, precise and loyal and courageous, in the specific, unglamorous way that real courage works, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that simply does the next right thing when the next right thing is hard and keeps doing it, and does not expect anyone to notice. The world had changed around her. His perception had changed. The room had changed. The title on the door had changed. She had not changed. She was exactly who she had always been, standing quietly in a space that had finally grown large enough to hold her. And Anthony Moretti, a man who had spent 30 years measuring people by their usefulness, their power, their position, their willingness to be feared, had finally learned the one thing that mattered most. The most valuable person in any room is not the loudest, not the most powerful, not the one who demands to be seen. It is the one who keeps showing up, who keeps doing the work, who keeps choosing right over easy, loyalty over safety, truth over silence, even when nobody is watching, even when nobody would know, even when the cost is a jail cell at midnight and one phone call to the only number that mattered. That was Clara Bennett. That had always been Clara Bennett. And now finally, completely, without reservation, the world knew it too.